Rebuilding the rear shock on your mountain bike is a service which is recommended yearly, but when taken to be serviced by the professionals can often cost hundreds of dollars. Learning to do it yourself will not only save you lots of money, but will also teach you valuable skills which can be used to work on your own bike. Today I will show you how to rebuild a rear shock, in particular a Fox X2, and these are the steps on how you do it yourself. First step is going to be removing the shock from your bike with the appropriate hex wrenches. Starting off with some of the various supplies and tools you're going to need. Starting with some various hex wrench sizes. Your suspension oil. Fluids and rebuild kit for the seals. You're going to need some X2 clamps specific to the shock you're using. 14mm deep socket. Your X2 bullet tool. And then we got some other various specific X2 tools. These are going to be specific to whatever shock you're working on. First thing you're going to do, you're going to back out your dampers with compression and rebound fully open. Then you're going to take a flathead screwdriver, maybe you want a piece of cloth if any oil spills out, and release all the air from your shock. First we're going to remove the air sleeve from the shock. Going to nip it up in the vise. You're going to rotate the air sleeve counterclockwise and then down. I'm just going to remove that from there. Remove the air sleeve. I'm going to inspect that, make sure it has no scratches. And just clean it with some isopropyl alcohol. Next up, we're going to clamp the X2 in the shaft clamps. Careful not to scratch anything, that could damage your rear shock. Make sure that's really tight so it's not going to slip at all. Should be good. Next, we're going to remove the negative air seal head using the prongs of this tool. You got to be really careful to apply downward force so you don't get any slipping. That should be good. First, we're just going to loosen the top assembly here. Move it from the vise. Take off your shaft clamps. We're just going to unthread the bottom assembly from the main air chamber. Going to make sure your shaft is clear of any oil. We're going to put that back in the shaft clamps again. Get that as tight as you can to make sure it's not going to slip at all. Next, we're going to loosen the top assembly here. There's a specific tool for it, but a hex wrench works fine. Just unthread that. Once you remove that, you're just going to remove any spacers and seals which are on there, clean it, and then replace it with new ones from the kit. Take some grease on your O-ring. Get that on your assembly here. And put on your spacer underneath that. That's good to go. Going to remove the travel reducer and spacer as well as the bottom out bumper. Set those over here. Remove it from the clamps. Now we're just going to remove the whole air shaft assembly. Set that over there. Remove that from here. Just going to put that down here, let that drain. Then we're just going to remove negative air spacer, the negative air seal head, put those over here. Okay. We're going to remove the inner body. It's going to take a little bit of force. Don't bend the shaft while pulling it off. There's that. We're going to put this back in the shaft clamps and the vise. Next, we're just going to remove the bearing assembly, replace the seals and rings on that. Next, we're just going to take the upper assembly of our shock, which has been draining here, get it clamped in the vise. Then we're just going to put on our travel indicator O-ring, followed by the negative air seal head. Make sure that is on the correct orientation. I have put that on upside down before. And then this other O-ring. Next, we're just going to pop out the retaining ring in the chamber, thread the shock pump onto the air valve in here. Then we're just going to gently pull out the air assembly. Next, we're just going to take an air compressor, put something over the opening of this so it doesn't just blast out of here. Cover that up. And next, we're just going to remove the O-rings, or the O-ring from the internal floating piston. Replace that with a new one, a new greased one. Get that back on there. There we go. We'll set that aside. Now we'll take our 5-weight suspension oil, pour it into the main chamber until the other chamber fills up just above the ring line. You let that transfer to the other side slowly. Now we're just going to take a glove, stretch it over the main chamber, and we're going to bleed the port. Okay, now we're just going to top off this reservoir to the top. We're going to take that IFP, very carefully insert that in. You want no air underneath it. Press that in until it gets beneath the retaining groove in there. There we go. Now we're just going to take our inner body for the air sleeve, carefully slide that into here. We're just going to seat that in there, make sure it's clicks. There we go. So next we'll take a syringe. We're just going to take a little bit of oil in the syringe. Then just set that aside. We're going to top off the chamber again. Make sure that's nice and straight. All the way to the top. Next we're going to take our bearing assembly here, pre-fill all the holes in it with the syringe. And now we're going to very quickly and carefully insert that into the main body and thread that in. Next, we're just going to remove the bleed port here. And we're going to set the IFP height to 1.343 inches using our vernier caliper, which I've already set. So you can see it's still got to go a ways. So we'll very carefully push that in. Some oil will flow out. Then you just measure till you get it right. Now we're going to take our seal here, install that, get it below the retaining ring lever in here. Next, we're just going to thread the shock pump onto the valve here. And we're going to inflate that to 125 psi. There we go. Next, we're just going to take some float fluid. Just going to coat the stanchion with a little bit of that. And then we're gonna install the inner air sleeve onto the assembly. Like that. Next we'll take our bottom out bumper, slide that on the shaft, followed by the bottom out plate. And then we're just going to take a drop of red Loctite, 1 drop on the threads. We're going to install the non-adjuster eyelet. There we go. Now we're just going to clamp the shock again in the vise, not too tight. Make sure it stays straight up and down. Going to put 2 cubic centimeters, or whatever it's called, of float fluid into the bottom. Just going to thread the seal head on. Till it's about snug, just about there. Take your seal head, negative air seal head tool. We're going to tighten that to 20 newton meters. Now we're just going to reinstall all the travel spacers, however many we had at the beginning. Now we're just going to install the outer air sleeve. Line it up with the notches. Finally, we're just going to install the wire O-ring back onto the shock. There we go. Wipe it down with some alcohol, get it all cleaned off, and there you have it. Now I'll just reinstall it on the bike. And it's done. So in conclusion, today I've showed you how to rebuild a Fox X2. I hope this was somewhat interesting, and thank you for listening.